Hi, I'm Dave Essinger, General Editor of the AWP Intro Journals Project. This contest invites nominations from AWP member programs every fall for student work in poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. Winners are placed for publication in prominent journals including, this year, the Colorado Review, Puerto del Sol, Reed Magazine, the Tampa Review, Hayden's Ferry Review, Mid-American Review, Iron Horse Literary Review, and Quarterly West. This year's judges were Suzanne Moeller for poetry, Rebecca Moon Rourke in creative nonfiction, and Cliff Garstang in fiction. Tonight's reading will feature 4 of this year's award winners. Hunter's Moon by Sam Burt, which will appear in Colorado Review. El Velorio in Elegy by Jerilynn Aquino, which will be in Reed. Triptych House by Kanika Ahuja, which will be in Puerto del Sol. And If You Weren't There by Sandy Robertson, which will also be in Colorado Review. And starting things off tonight will be Sam Burt. Sam, if you're ready, all you.
All right, thank you. Should I just jump right in? So this is a poem addressed to my dad, and as Dave said, it's titled Hunter's Moon. Silent at your side, I've soaked my boots in untamed pastures, as the moon paled and distant turkeys stoked the croaking fires of morning. I've seen your hands go glossy as candy apples above pails of bloody feathers, felt the firmness of a banded leg, the potential dying in its spur. I've watched geese char against a molten sky, heard the beads of a shotgun pluck at water's skin, muffled by the camouflaged arm you wrapped over my face when the shot rang from the invisible end of the marsh. Your jacket smelled like moss, like dust and blood, warm as the sunset prying open the crook of your elbow. Now I wonder, when the earth dims and the sky soaks up its color, would I hear the same music in the unfolding and refolding of the day? Had I never learned, had you never taught me what love demands of gentle hands? Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That was great. So we have time for some Q&A, some conversation. Any thoughts, questions, commentary from anyone else in the room here? Yeah, Sandy, go ahead.
I was struck in this poem by, well, it was beautiful, for one thing, of course. That's something I always love to be struck by in poetry, is beauty. But I also was struck by how intimate the poem was, the intimacy of this and this tenderness in this moment, and then how it contrasted with the blood and the violence of the shotgun. It was an unusual mix, and I thought a very effective one, a very powerful one.
Thank you. Yeah, that was you said better than I could everything that I was trying to go for with this piece. I wanted to get into those spaces of unspoken care and tenderness, where you can learn how somebody feels based on action, less than words, and the contrast that sprung up around the violence versus the tenderness was just a natural progression of where I was finding those moments of greatest care, I think.
Yeah, I thought it was beautifully done.
Thanks.
Well, Sam, I had a couple questions too. So this is dedicated to your father, the For Dad subtitle dedication there. Can you tell us any more about that? Is your father still with us? Has he read this poem? Can you tell us about your thoughts and what did he think, or what would he think?
Yeah, he is still alive, thankfully, and he did read this poem. I have a deal with my parents where they're allowed to read my work if it gets published anywhere. So that that was that's what did it there. Yeah, he remembered this anecdote really well with this other hunter's shotgun shot kind of going straight up and over us, and sort of rushing to protect my my head in that moment. And yeah, I think, let's see, what else can I say about that? Well, I wrote this poem on the day of the hunter's moon last October 21st, which is the first full moon after the harvest moon. And I knew I wanted to write a poem about all of these like moments that I spent as a child, maybe 11, 12 years old, out in the fields and the woods with my dad. And I also wanted to write a poem that was trying to unpack and understand why I'm writing so many nature poems all the time, and like why I find just the outdoors the most beautiful thing. And it turned out that was one poem, and as I started writing one, the other sort of found its way in. Yeah. So sorry, I've like, these are the first words I've spoken all day. So I'm like trying to make sure I'm making sense and everything. But thank you for your patience.
Well, I kind of on that note, I feel like I could relate to this poem, and I know that we were just talking before we started recording that we're just both talking from the kind of same end of Northwest Ohio here. But can I ask, where are you from? Where you grew up, or where the moment this poem took place?
So I'm from a small town in rural Iowa called Grinnell, and it's very similar to Bowling Green in Northwest Ohio over there, just super, super flat. There's marshland in the area, the way that this kind of area, the Black Swamp region, is former marshland or drained marshland. So there's places for a lot of duck habitats and goose habitats and whatnot to spring up around there. But yeah, so yeah, just imagine Northwest Ohio, but an entire state, and that's my home state.
Good stuff. Well, Sam, anything you'd like to tell us about what else you're working on? What's going on in the coming academic year? Plans for later?
Yeah, so I'm going into my second year of my poetry MFA here at Bowling Green State University, and my graduate thesis is daunting, but I think it's starting to take shape, and I think I really started to feel it taking shape actually after I wrote this poem, and it started to make more sense to me, like the themes that I wanted to explore, whether it's like touch and tenderness, or like nature imagery and memory and those sorts of things. So I've just started to kind of compile and order that project with this poem at the very start. So I hope it kind of sets the tone for that project as a whole.
Fantastic. Well, we'll look forward to seeing more of your work in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. So next up, we have Jerilynn Aquino with El Velorio in Elegy. This one's going to appear in Read. And Jerilynn sent me a little bit of a bio, which I will read without trying. without staring too badly off screen. Jerilynn Aquino is a writer from Philadelphia whose work has appeared in Read Magazine, River Styx, Gulf Coast, Passages North, and elsewhere. She received her MFA in fiction from Temple University and is currently pursuing her PhD in creative nonfiction at Oklahoma State University. So very cool. Welcome, Jerilynn, and yeah, whenever you're ready.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to AWP, and thank you to Read Magazine for picking up this piece. Tonight, I'm going to read about half of the essay, El Velorio, an Elegy. In 1893, when Puerto Rico was still under Spanish rule, Francisco Oller painted El Velorio, an impressionist scene of jubilant mourners at a child's wake. The child is laid out on a lace-covered dinner table, her hands in prayer, her body adorned with flowers. Around her, mourners drink and play instruments like the guiro. They embrace and laugh while dogs and another child play. While I was away for college, my mother toured Spanish Harlem and purchased a 33 by 24 print of this painting. Loved it so much she ordered its own custom-made wooden frame. Whenever I visited home, she would foist upon me ugly ponchos, bedazzled purses, things I would take because if I didn't, she would sniffle and pout, accuse me of hating her. Not being able to afford my own decorations at the time, what I admired most was her Puerto Rican wall decor. She would give me everything except the thing I wanted, El Velorio, which she said I could only have after she died. I am in the same Airbnb where my mother died 3 days ago. Wet tissue and clenched fist, I am listening to my husband over the phone. I am in Aguadilla, and he is 2,000 miles away, driving to Oklahoma from where we live in Philly in search of our next home. He is crying openly, mourning the part or parts of me that have died, though neither of us yet know which part or parts. I want to hold you, he says. Crying is hard for him. Even now, his capacity for empathy surprises me. My mother's death was unexpected, and my body has since been mutating. I'm as bloated as a floating corpse, swelling helplessly, rapidly, vicious hives feasting across my abdomen, seeping despair. I did not know my body was capable of such quick transformation. There is so much discovery in grief. Though El Velorio translates to the wake, the painting actually portrays the baquine, a dying Afro-Caribbean tradition. The baquine is not unlike a paranda during Christmas time, my mother's favorite tradition, where she and I would clasp hands, show off our dance moves, hold each other as our hips and feet moved in sync to aguinaldos. One of the rare moments in my adulthood where she and I were in happy alignment. While parandas celebrate the birth of Christ, the baquine celebrates the death of an infant the night before burial, because Puerto Ricans love to party, because the celebratory occasion is the child becoming an angel in heaven. The next morning, people would wake with their grief and joy hangovers to witness the gaping earth swallow the child, a dead seed. In some ways, my mother too was a child when she died, though I cannot imagine her an angel. In Philly 2 months earlier, my coworker's mother suffered a ruptured brain aneurysm and died. Like my mother, hers was 65. My mother had recently called, told me in a watery whisper, "Daddy called the cops last night. I was threatening to swallow a bottle of pills." I kept steady, cold, a defense I'd mastered in recent years. "Why would you tell me this? I'm not your therapist or friend." I hung up on my suicidal mother. Sometime in my childhood, she had reversed our roles, mothered only when bruising. I hated her for seeing me an empty vessel to fill with soil. The coworker, Anna, posted on social media, "You were not just my mom, you were my best friend." Anna, I'm sorry I cringed. I'm sorry I could not understand why you took 2 months off work. I'm sorry I snorted and said to my husband, "Couldn't be me." Anna, I see now. We live in the same unlit house, occupying 2 separate wings. Born in Bayamon, son of 2 Spanish elites, Francisco Oller was an abolitionist. In El Velorio, a Black man in tattered clothes, front and center, crouches over the child. He's the only one gazing at death, For the child, lack of life. For the man, lack of capital. Both dehumanized here on Earth, here in Puerto Rico, which was colonized before and after 1898, when the United States said with wry satisfaction, "Let us help." My mother knew nothing of Oyer's social criticism. She wanted this painting because Oyer was Puerto Rican, because in the painting, there's a shack where plantains are strung from the rafters and people of varied colors are entranced in music, in tradition, and prayer, a portrait of her life. A century had changed nothing, and there is nothing more to her purchase than that. 1 month before her death, another phone call, more tears. This time, she tells me the white Latinos in her retirement community ignore her because she is dark. This time, I do not hang up. Half descended from colonizers, I soothe her, tell her this couldn't be true, but even if true, fuck them. I'm exhausted from 30 years of trying to convince her she's beautiful, worthy of love. My mother had been abandoned and left with relatives who tied her to kitchen tables, beat her, called her dirty. I spent my life in combat with the permanence of trauma. 12 hours after her death, my father says, "I'm sorry to put this on you," meaning the decision to cremate. I decide against decomposition and instead secure her in ornate vases gleaming in golds, pinks. She always wanted to be beautiful, flat-bellied, soft, a lighter shade of brown. Perhaps she was dreaming herself beautiful before she stopped breathing. When it's too late, I'll realize I chose the cheaper option. In El Velorio, the only figure looking at the audience, a woman, the mother, faces us with a grin. I'm surprised to find some accounts claiming her expression is that of pain, devastation, that the men around her are consoling. I have to dig deep to find scholars who agree with me. Yes, yes, she is smiling. She's the only one disturbing the scene, forcing the viewer to witness her disruptive joy, her body. What's more, she holds a drained chalice in her extended hand. Mother is grieving. Mother is smiling. Mother is partying. Toward the end, my mother loved to turn up. I suspect she knew she would soon die. I want my mother and El Velorio's mother to go clubbing, find each other under pulsating lights, giggle in grime-slick bathrooms, stumble home with arms wrapped around each other's hips, cry about what life ripped away and replaced with a drink. As my mother was dying in Aguadilla, I was in Philly, dreaming. I was walking down the street, passing a vacant lot where my oldest brother stood, dirt, gravel, broken glass beneath his feet. I asked what he was doing here. He lived in Jersey and hadn't visited or called in months. He smiled, opened his mouth to tell me something. And then I woke up, and later that morning he calls me. He says, "Something happened with Mom." It's something serious, his voice lacking its usual gaiety. I'm gearing up for another tale of histrionics when he says, "She went to bed. She passed away." What I process first is unforgiving finality, something being removed, scooped out of me. No more chances for her or for me. Then I'm shouting, "What do you mean?" I know what he means. I'm begging him to try again. Give me another truth. I'm unable to stop shouting no, and what do you mean, and oh God. Grief begins this way, bellows roaring down a dark and lonely hallway. I lose gravity. I fall. I crawl on hands and knees, searching for something to grasp while my husband takes the phone. Fuck the 5 stages of grief. This is how you lose a parent. Close your eyes. Extend your hands for a surprise. Look at what you've been given, a new and terrible life. Reject what cannot be rejected. Spend the rest of your life searching for ways to live with an irrefutable fact. Have someone there who loves you, someone who will hand you a glass of whiskey and help you pack. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jerilynn. That's the whole essay is powerful. Great stuff. Would anyone else have commentary, questions? I have thoughts, but yeah, Sam.
Hi, thank you. I have kind of a process-oriented question because I'm curious about your starting points with this. Because this theme of celebration runs through the piece and ends with it as well. And it's really resonant and moving. And I wondered if that insight that you found and the connection between your mother and the painting and the bakine was one that you started writing with, or if that was something that the act of writing uncovered as you were going.
Well, thank you first, everyone, for your kind words, and thank you for that question. So when I came to my program, I knew that I had wanted to write about my mother's passing, but it took me a very long time to feel ready to do so. And I think it was the fall semester, actually, that I had a workshop, and for some reason, I just was like, I'm ready to do this. I got to do this. And I did not know how to start at all. And I was sitting in my living room and I looked at that painting. I have the print in my living room. And I just said, I'll start there. I mean, the essay, it's an essay, it's CNF, it's true to life. So I had received it after my mother had passed. And, I started doing some research. I think the celebration kind of came out through both like through planning and both through process, because one of the things that makes this painting so striking is that it does look very jubilant. It does look like a celebration. It's kind of confusing. And what also makes it jarring is that there's a dead child in the center of it. So I'm kind of unpacking the history behind this painting, kind of unpacking the tradition behind this painting, and trying to connect it to my own experience where, of course, her death was definitely not a celebratory thing for me, but there was a sense of relief. And I wanted to be true to that. And also, because my mother loved parties. I mean, it can be as simple as that. My mother loved parties. And it just kind of came together for me. And I wanted to end on a kind of celebratory note where it's like, you don't have to hide that part of you that does want to turn up, so to speak. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And wow, I love the kind of the ekphrastic way in there, the use of the painting as a means of beginning to talk about this, because it's a complicated subject and it's a complicated painting. And it's obviously you were kind of working this over for a while, and because of the complicated subject matter, and it's real, which is the important thing too. I'm kind of talking in circles here, but I guess I'm curious about the experience of writing this. Did you feel like you were kind of writing through some of these feelings and processing this, or kind of figuring out your relationship to your mother in retrospect?
Thank you. I realized there was a good reason why I had put it off for so long. I mean, I'd written essays about my mother even after she passed, but the death itself was something that was really difficult. Trauma theory calls it like a speechless terror. Like that's kind of what I was experiencing. The process itself, what I was going through, it was hell. I'm going to be quite frank about that. It was difficult. It was painful. I had never really cried writing essays before, but I certainly did. And I just was like, this is a mess. And I was a mess. So I really needed this painting. I really did. It was kind of like my, what's it? The safety thing that you hold on to, the float in the ocean of grief to hang on to. And I think that's why there's that kind of structure of the essay where I focus on the painting and go back to my experience, because I just had to keep going back to every time I finished like a section, I just was like, oh God, that was so much. Like, how do I keep going? And of course, keep in mind, this is for a workshop. So I had a deadline too, which was like not making anything easier. So it was like one foot in front of the other, like painting me. But I did, yeah, I don't know. I think it did help me pick apart a lot of the things that I had trouble untangling for so long. She had passed in 2019, and I think I wrote this last year. So yeah, there was a lot of entangling and a lot of revelation. That's where that line came from, honestly.
I just was very struck by, I thought it was really beautifully done. I thought the way you wove, to me, it was very artfully done, the weaving of the history of the painting and all the traditions associated with your own personal sort of interior experience. And I thought the way that the painting itself was sort of the transformation of the whole, the velorio to the bacchine, was wonderful. I mean, that was sort of the culture of Puerto Rico, what it does with the colonized culture. And I thought all of that was so rich. It was, and along with being about the death of a mother, which I think is the most, well, you talked about a permanent kind of, that you had spent your life in a permanent combat with trauma. And yet then when this loss occurs, and the loss of a mother, I think, is something that if you haven't experienced it, which I have, then it's the biggest one. And it seemed like the way you wrestled with that in this essay was just really masterful. I was really struck by how you were able to pull in your mother, the culture, yourself, and all of it together. And it just the idea of the painting itself being this child, this dead seed, as you put it. I don't know. It was very powerful to me, and I think I'm very in awe of all the work here. And I certainly was of yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jerilynn. It's a really great piece, very strong, and it's forthcoming in Read magazine. Has this gone to print already? Do you know?
It has. I have my copies already. I was so surprised, but very, very delighted. And it's a gorgeous issue. I think it's issue 155. That's the recent issue. So yeah.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Triptych House by Kanika Ahuja, and this will be coming out in Puerto del Sol, yes?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me and for letting me read my long poem about all my insects that I love very dearly. This one's called Triptych House. 1. The house feels smaller now that all the lizards want to come back out. And of course, this has very little to do with the lizards creeping slowly out of their sleepy homes, head peeking from under light bulbs and flower pots and picture frames. It is the spring after the season we did not live, and the bougainvilleas bloom brighter. After all this time spent sleeping, what do you make of boundaries, if not railings to lean over? Soon, there will be little lizard babies sharing my floor, slipping down walls, tails shivering in surrender. Everyone I know has a story about a lizard falling, sometimes on the head, sometimes barely missing, blessed like a target spared from impact. Maybe that's too dramatic. I know. I'm the only one who cares this much about the lizard homes in my home and how, at this moment, they are all hiding under a sleeping bag I cannot get my father to toss. What do you make of all this endearment, if not an archive to hoard like a memory? Once, a woman brought a baby lizard into the metro, nested in her long hair. It fell on the next seat like a stray lock, and we wanted to help her, but who could move closer, afraid of the afraid lizard baby that wanted to jump out like the rest of us? and suddenly there were walls that caved in like boundaries and a door that wouldn't open soon enough as we peeked out of the window corners at the city full of wild bougainvilleas drooping all over the sidewalks. 2. The house feels weaker now that the termites have eaten the walls. And of course, who notices termites before the crumbs start to show? I mistake wood dust for normal dust, and months later, wardrobes blow away in the wind. Generations, we are told, of termites raised in our walls. This house, a house where nothing leaves. For years, my father would bring home guests, tourists. Look, a real family, generation after generation after generation, living here together. We, the house freaks, who could love like us, who could stay season after season, sharing loneliness like old clothes hanging tattered in the sun. Pest control drills poison into walls, pulls apart drawers, cupboards, shelf after shelf, and millions of termites fall like only millions of termites should. We stand in awe. So much destruction, termite so small, the collateral damage of appetite. For days, we pull the gossamer residue of termite wings from picture frames and bookends, rip dead baby lizards off walls and windowsills, rake ants like dead leaves, the carcass almost as gruesome as the pest. And what does it mean for everything to come and die here? This house, a house where nothing lives. When the termites die, the house smells of guilt. Day after drowsy day, we wait, slow only in our patience, for the slow poison in walls to start reeking of air. 3. The house feels warmer now that the rats have found the air conditioning ducts. And of course, a dead rat in an air conditioning duct is an inconvenience. It's too much blood, too much street, too much gutter water stench for one house to bear. To find its way out, a rat builds a tunnel, chews through thermocol, plastic, wet cement, only to lie flat in fresh air. The living will do everything to live. Soon, a squirrel will find thermocol pieces to warm its nest, bring them to the space between window panes. Comfort, only a mockery, a spectacle of abundance. The rat must go, but we are cowards just as we are tender. Only foods with a strong smell hang in the rat trap. Key, green chilies, even cheese. The rat, now not nameless, wants only a corner to claim with rat poop and call home. Days later, the caged rat will squeak, and we will take turns to apologize and stare at each other. What do we make of captivity? We too held captive here. My father will walk away first, more coward than tender, because who wants to get their hands dirty, returning this gutter stench offering back to the gutter? Once, when a bird dropped dead on our terrace, I held it in both arms to set it free, knowing it would only fall anyway. The living do everything for a chance to live. The dead don't even try.
Thank you, Kanika. That was great. Anybody want to comment or any questions that you'd like to ask? Sure, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, so before I get into my question, there's just like so many lines that I am obsessed with that I want to point out first. Like like the collateral damage of appetite. What do you make of boundaries if not railings to lean over? I think like, yeah, I could just keep looking through and finding more. We are cowards just as we are tender. But what I'm asking about actually is, so on the page, you've spaced out some words and some phrases. And I'm curious, like, if that's something that happens as you're writing or as you're revising, and what signals to you that that something needs to be spaced out and have its own room on the page.
Thank you. And I'm so glad you like the lines. This is a very special poem in many ways. In terms of spacing, I feel like when I was thinking about this poem in general, I couldn't not have spaces because most of the pests hide in these spaces. So the body of the poem was very close to the walls of the house for me, and so I wanted to leave spaces for the pests to live.
I love that answer. Thank you so much.
You know, I have maybe a behind the scenes comment here. Nobody knows this, so I'll tell you this little story. When Suzanne was judging these, she asked me to print them off in hard copy and send them along. Usually, I just forward a great big old blinded and zipped file of files, digitally. But I sent her the hard copies because she wanted to read them this way, which I can understand that, sure. And she gets back to me with her winners and I think on her list was Triptych House 1. The house feels smaller now that all the lizards want to come back out. And I said, that's great. Are you aware that it's that there are 3 pages here? And she said, well, now I like it even better. So, which kind of leads to one of my questions: why the triptych form? I love the way that it builds and expands into the third piece of the triptych here. But can you tell us what led you to that tri form there?
Absolutely. So what's actually true is last July, I was packing to move from New Delhi to the US to start my MFA. And in the same month, everything that happens in the poem happened in one room. And my biggest question and curiosity that entire time was just how much can one room endure and keep enduring? And when I thought about that, it originally did actually start as just the lizard poem, but as I kept thinking about it, I just couldn't separate them from each other.
Well, I love the effect of them all together. That's great. Jerilynn, Sandy, anything you'd like to add or ask while we're here?
I just wanted to say that as someone who has lizards right under me right now, hiding away, and they are out every morning doing their little push-ups, and also someone who has had rats, snakes, raccoons, skunks, and possums living in very close proximity, actually under my house, banging the pipes at night, what have you. I just enjoyed this poem a lot. I'm very glad you told me about the spacing. I thought that really added something. Maybe you could put a footnote somewhere. That's such a great idea. But it was just a wonderful, it just brought up for me just a lot of feelings about that closeness to animals and animal life and how they inhabit our lives, even when we can't quite see them. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much. And I really think, Sandy, you're living my ideal life. All I want is to have lizards and rats and snakes going all around my house.
Well, Thanks, Kanika. Should we segue? Should we hear from Sandy now? I have a fast bio. Sandy says she holds a PhD in Spanish literature, and she's currently working on a novel for her MFA at San Diego State. So let's see. And this piece is, If You Weren't There, and this will also be in Colorado Review. So Sandy, whenever you're ready.
But this essay was the beginning of the essays I'm not reading. It takes place in Madrid in 1967-68, and which was a year of tremendous political education for me, and as a young college student, an American. And I'm going to be reading the end of the essay, which happens in Berkeley during a very tumultuous time around the construction of a park in Berkeley, and the takedown of that park by the police. I phoned my mother the next morning. I tried to describe what had happened, but my anger and distress, along with the expense of a long-distance call, kept her from fully grasping how violent the day had been. The day after that, she read something in the Washington Post and called me back. "Are you all right? What about the baby?" I wasn't worried about the baby. It seemed to me the baby was the only one who was safe. I had class that morning. All was quiet. I decided to go. Wearing an enormous pink dress and Dr. Scholl clogs, I opened the front door and stepped out into the sunshine. The barrel of a machine gun pointed directly at me, mounted on a tripod with a thick belt of ammunition running through it. "Miss?" I looked at the helmeted soldier standing next to it. He held a weapon against his chest, crisscrossed by lines of bullets. He took in my expanded shape, and he cleared his throat. "You don't want to go anywhere near that campus today, ma'am. There's bound to be trouble. You could get hurt." "But I have class," I said. He angled forward with his gun and examined me. "You're a student?" It occurred to me this young man had never seen a very pregnant student. It was a lot for him to take in. "Yes." He stepped back, shifted the gun against his shoulder, and waved his other arm. "Go ahead." He didn't look at me again. It was quiet because I was living in a war zone. During the night, Reagan had ordered Berkeley occupied by 2,700 National Guards. They were armed. They lined every street I walked along. Machine guns perched at regular intervals on the sidewalks and secured all the corners. I passed by the park. A barricade of armed soldiers and barbed wire circled the remains of broken play equipment, jettisoned trees, uprooted shrubs, and jagged piles of what must have been the speaker's platform and the soup kitchen tables. Someone had twined a few dying daisies from trampled plants through the barbed wire. The park was gone. It was over. The war went on for weeks. The next morning and the days following, the whop-whop of helicopter blades just a few feet overhead rammed us awake, hearts pounding. A curfew was imposed. Anyone on the streets after sundown was arrested. Now I understood what the streets of Madrid must have been like after the city's defeat in the war, muffled with fear. During the day, helicopters patrolled the area, releasing tear gas wherever people gathered. Light winds spread the gas over the city. The smell of burning plastic hung in the air. Breathing was laborious, even for children. I continued attending classes. One afternoon, heading home along Telegraph, a line of what we now call the blue meanies, or pigs, depending on your mood, appeared in full riot gear at the end of the block. Everybody immediately around me scattered. The Tlatelolco massacre flashed through my mind, and I turned to go back. But another row of shielded, masked, bulked bodies blocked the intersection behind me. At nearly 9 months, I was too huge to be much of a runner. It was too late anyway. Tear gas exploded overhead. Everywhere on the street, people screamed and bolted for cover. A piercing fire attacked my eyes and then my throat, squeezing them shut. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I choked I gasped for air. My eyes were seeping and my lungs were in flames. Someone took my arm and pulled me. I stumbled after them and found myself inside a bookstore crammed with choking, struggling bodies. I felt my way along the wall into a corner and collapsed, coughing and spitting and weeping against the poison spreading over my skin, penetrating my insides. What about the baby? Dazed, I rested against a wall. Merely walking home on a warm spring day, I am under fire. I am the enemy, a protester, a student, a street person. Who knows? Most likely a communist. At least in my present enlarged condition, Reagan wouldn't call me a sex deviant, whatever that was. When I could breathe and walk, I stumbled home. I wasn't arrested that day, but many on the street were. The assaults continued. Now we understood the tactics. Close off a block at both ends, toss tear gas or mace or a fog of pepper spray, arrest everyone caught in between the barricades, and beat those who resisted arrest. Only we never knew when the attacks were going to occur. So when Dan was late for dinner one evening, I worried. He'd gone down to the main post office that morning. That was all I knew. The sun was setting. Soon it would be dark. Curfew. I called Andy to see if he knew anything. Haven't seen him today, he said. By the time Dan appeared at the door, I was frantic. What happened to you? I got arrested. For God's sake, what for? Same as you, he said, for being on the street. Dan was always droll. Along with a mailman, a nun, and dozens of other people going about their business, Dan was outside the post office when riot guards popped up at each end of the block to break up what they announced through bullhorns was an, quote, an unlawful assembly. They handcuffed everybody trapped on the block, loaded them into trucks, and drove them to the Santa Rita Correctional Facility about an hour away. There, they spread everyone out in the parking lot and made them lie face down on the concrete, still cuffed, for what to Dan seemed like hours. As soon as he was processed, fingerprinted, and photographed, he was released. They gave him a bus ticket for the long ride home. The ironies of protocol. At least they hadn't set his bail. $800 was all we had saved to have the baby. Student health insurance did not cover pregnancy or birth. Congratulations, I said. You'll have an FBI file now. Dan laughed. I already do. So do you. We're stars. They've photographed crowds of us ordinary citizens from helicopters so they can identify the communist sympathizers. I called Andy to tell him Dan was safe, sort of. Who was really safe? Everything around me threatened to fall apart. My own enormous body scared me. I wondered how whoever was inside could ever find a way out. I couldn't recall how good I'd felt a few weeks before. Now tomorrow was merely to guess at. I worried I would not finish my courses before the baby came, knowing there would be no time to study after that. Life had no shape for me after that. And classes seemed increasingly absurd. Once listening to a lecture on 16th century cancioneros, the helicopters hovered outside the windows of the classroom and sprayed clouds of pepper gas. I was even more horrified when the professor, who had asked to borrow the materials on traditional poetry I'd collected in Madrid, barely paused and carried on his lecture in a loud, stentorian tone, dismissing the helicopters with a flourish of his hand. A couple of days later, I noticed bullet holes in the exterior walls of the same building. I easily inserted my fingers in them. 2 days after that, there were no classes to go to. More than 100 professors refused to teach on a campus occupied by the military. I remembered the total shutdown of the Complutense by Franco's government. It could happen here. Off campus, the neighborhood practiced its own form of resistance. Several women approached the National Guard, standing stiffly at their posts, and adorned them with necklaces of flowers. Others offered joints of homegrown marijuana or cokes laced with LSD, while speaking words of peace and love to the hearts inside those rigid bodies. Giant loudspeakers appeared on porches and garage roofs, blasting Marvin Gaye, the Beatles, and the Stones into space for the ears hidden by helmets all day long. The Berkeley City Council voted unanimously against the occupation, but Reagan ordered the National Guard to stay. Long after the attacks and tear gas stopped, soldiers continued to break up groups of people gathered for any reason, and at times entered stores and restaurants, arresting anyone who protested arrest, as well as others standing by, protesting what they saw. 3 weeks before the baby came, a peaceful march was organized to remember the dead and the injured. Everyone I knew was there, among hundreds or possibly thousands more. We strolled down Telegraph in the sunshine, calm in our solidarity. Some women stepped over to place flowers in the barrels of the guards' rifles as we passed. I peered behind the barricade of armed guards into the ruins of the park. It was full of junk, broken equipment and debris, and looked much as it had before. Any trace of the grass and the gardens there had been erased. Even though I had seen it, it hadn't happened. 10 days before the baby came, I heard the Regents had voted to turn the lot into a soccer field. As far as I know, that never happened. I don't remember when the guards were withdrawn. My attention went elsewhere. Classes resumed, and I devoted myself to term papers and exams, relieved to be finishing coursework for the MA. Then I started cleaning house. On July 1st, I just mopped the kitchen floor when the water broke. 22 hours later, amazed and deliriously happy, I held a big, healthy baby boy in my arms. We named him Zachary, from the Hebrew for God remembers. When I flew back east with Zach to see my parents some weeks later, photos of guards holding rifles, spouting flowers, appeared in almost every magazine on their coffee table. I flipped through them. Not one article gave a true account of the violence and repression we'd lived through. It all looked rather amusing. Happy hippies instead of dead and wounded people shot by their own government. I remembered photos of Franco smiling benignly at his baby granddaughter. How many executions had he ordered that day? Was this censorship or indifference? My mother had trouble understanding why I was so angry. I guess if you weren't there, I told her, it didn't happen. Later, she sent me an editorial from the Washington Post, understating the point that, quote, indiscriminate gassing of 1,000 people not at the time in violation of any law seems more than a little excessive. No one mentioned the dead. It was better than reading about the baptism of Franco's granddaughter, but not much better.
Wow, yeah, that's a strong piece, Sandy. It's terrifying and infuriating to read the whole thing. And one thing that struck me was, I guess, larger than the excerpt that we had time for. But you set this up by taking us through Franco era Spain and Tlatelolco and in Mexico, as we begin to think, this can't happen here. This can't happen today. And then it comes here. I feel like the kind of the looming question here is, and this is all talking about, events of 50 years ago, but you're not, directly connecting this to today, but certainly the looming potential connection is unavoidable. Was that a conscious choice not to draw that parallel to like right now, or did you want to just leave that there for us to connect?
I'm so glad you asked that, because there's a story behind this. I had sent this essay out to many places and had it rejected many times. And then I brought it into a creative nonfiction writing class that I was taking at the time. Thought maybe I can work on it here, So I revised it there. And there was a lot of trouble with the ending. I couldn't make up my mind. I had a lot of feedback in the workshop. So I had about 3 different endings to this essay. And the night before they were due, this was maybe a year ago, the professor of that class called me up. She said, you should submit your essay for the intro journals project. We're collecting things to send to them. You should send in that essay. And I said, oh, really? I had sent it out 10 more times after that, and it had been rejected. So I'd sort of forgotten about it. And so there was a deadline. She said, you have to get it in by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And this was like 10 o'clock at night. So I just went on my computer, found it, and sent it in. I sent in the version that did not have the ending, that I had never decided on, because I could never decide on the ending. And it was just because I was tired and not particularly worried about it. I just sent it in without the ending. And I'm very glad I did, because the ending had tried to draw the connections that you just made. There was no need for it. It's implicit, isn't it? It is stunning to me to see how so much has changed and so little has changed. And that the nowness is where it was going to end, but it really didn't need to. And I'm so glad that you saw that connection. And the people that have read it, who have gotten back to me, have said that that's how they saw it too. So I'm glad that I set it in without ever having decided on quite how to end it. And it was hard to decide what to read out of this essay, because the first part of the essay is also extremely important to me, and what was going on in those years, apparently all over the place, in Mexico, in Spain, in the United States, and yet how oblivious people have been about it. I think it was the first time in the history of the United States that the continental United States was attacked from the air. People were literally bombed from the air. That's Pearl Harbor. That was a completely different thing. But I think this was the first one. And of course, after that, the students were shot at Kent State. The complete disregard for it's still with me, and my son is grown now, and most people I know have absolutely no idea that this ever even happened.
Well, I'll say it would be interesting to see that ending, and I'm sure that you draw the connection well. But it sounds like, as it happened, it was a fortuitous curtailing in that I certainly didn't need the parallel is right there, I think, right?
For me, it was a learning lesson. When you're having that much trouble with an ending, just leave it out. You don't need the ending if you're struggling that long with it.
The alternate ending, or the difficulty of endings, which well, we are coming up to the end of our time here, but does anyone else have any questions for Sandy while we're here, before we wrap things up?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that work with us, Sandy. Just a quick question. I was curious if this piece is part of, or going to be part of, a larger body of work that you might be currently working toward, or if this was just something that you had written and then, like you had mentioned, submitted to workshop.
Well, I wonder often, I'd like to write about all of my experiences, but there's never going to be time enough. Right now, I'm working on a novel that has nothing to do with this. It's about 2 sisters growing up, it covers 50 years too, but growing up in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So I think that I just need more time. I'd like to write about a lot more of my experiences in Spain and in Mexico and in Berkeley and I would like to write about my mother the way you have. So God give us more time, right? But I right now, no, it's not connected to anything else.
Well, I'll say thank you, everybody, for giving us your time tonight. to thank our readers, Kanika and Jerilynn and Sandy and Sam. Great stuff. Congratulations. Thanks for being here. I'd like to thank AWP and the participating journals and Juanita Lester for making this happen. And I guess I'd like to thank everybody out there in internet land who will be watching this. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you.